Hello and welcome to this special bonus episode of The Dairy Edge. Teagasc are running a weekly Let's Talk Dairy webinar series, which is also being made available as a podcast. On this week's webinar, Stuart Childs gives advice on planning for autumn grass.
Welcome to this week's Let's Talk Dairy. So today is really going to be a very quick rundown, just a brief reminder really, if anything else. As I said last week, we were talking about the quantities of silage that are going to be on farms, and there's probably more of it in yards now in the last week than there was last week when we were talking about it, but there's more to be done, obviously. And that can potentially have an impact on what I'm going to talk about today, which is autumn grass cover and building it. And I think, unfortunately, John Maher will tell you that we do quite a good job in a lot of cases in terms of our mid-season management and so forth, and doing the spring grazing plan. We're getting better and better at it. But I suppose it's understandable that breeding is finishing now, or finished on most farms, and there's a big sigh of relief, I suppose, in a lot of cases, because dairy farming by its nature is front-loaded in terms of the workload. Calving, breeding, they're the important, getting silage made obviously as well, and preparing for the coming winter obviously in that sense. And then once all that's over, some people say you're in cruise control, but relatively speaking, things are a lot more straightforward on farms. And people probably take the foot off the pedal a little bit, and understandably, obviously, then as well, many people will not go on holidays until breeding is over, because they don't want that responsibility on people that are coming in to cover for holidays, etc. So then people will move head away on holidays at that stage. And unfortunately, it would seem from what we can see in the figures that come in through pasture base is that we either don't consciously decide to start building cover, or we just get that little bit lax, I suppose, maybe, or as I said, take the foot off the gas as such, and cover the actual effort that's required to put in, or to be put in to build farm cover doesn't happen on a lot of farms, and as a result, we end up housing a little bit earlier than we may need to. So I suppose I'm not saying that people need to change anything dramatically, but at the same time, people just need to be conscious of it. And I suppose that's why I'm talking about it on the 21st of July, because quite often I would say we probably ourselves in Teagasc have been guilty of maybe being too slow to talk about this topic with people, to make people aware of the need to actually be acting on it. So look, as I said, it's very brief today, just to highlight the importance of going about building cover for the spring. I'm just going to show you a very quick slide here in relation to building cover. So I just need to find it here now. Should have it closer to hand. So this is a table that people will be very familiar with, I would imagine. Just go full screen so you have a better view of that. So you can see that there's a variation obviously in the requirement, and obviously quite understandably, depending on the stocking rate on the platform, it's going to be easier or harder to build cover. So in reality, I suppose you're talking in a situation of where you're stocked to the cow to the acre, or the 2.5 livestock units to the hectare scenario, that you can almost in August build grass in spite of yourself assuming that we have normal conditions. And I would say, I suppose, when I say that about assuming that we have normal conditions, we've huge variation. Talking to some of the advisors up in the northern and western territories there in the last few days, variation in terms of poor growth rates up there because of bad weather. And then I suppose down this side of the country, as I said, in the last couple of weeks as well, variation in growth rates because of actually good weather, excessively good weather, I suppose, or excessively dry weather. So that could flip either way then basically. So we all saw the bounce that we got in 2018 following the dry spell breaking. And that we had quite a long growing season at that stage, which was obviously very welcome at that point. And again, I suppose all that emphasizes is that it's important that we are watching what way grass is growing on the farm for over this period as well, and making the right reaction, or making the right decisions around that. As we move into the higher stocking rates, so the 3, and in particular, I suppose the 3.5, you can see that it's quite hard to build the cover to get to a very high, because we don't want it excessively high. You could let it run ahead, but it's going to be very hard to graze. And unless you're on exceptionally dry ground, it's going to be very difficult to graze. And that's going to leave you with a very dirty boat or base for next year. And that obviously will have implications for graze outs in the spring as well, and also kind of the recovery of those pastures going into the winter. When I talk about a clean base as well, it's important to point out that at the 21st of July now, we have a very small window, possibly 3 to 4 weeks, maybe you could say up to mid-August, again, depending on the stocking rate, where we have the opportunity to correct any stemminess. And my God, there's a lot of stemminess out there because of the droughty conditions that are around the country. Ground that has been baled, ground that has been pre-mowed, ground that has been topped has come back with stem in it again because of the stress levels that the grass plant has been under. Even though we still are getting reasonable growth rates, they're just not where they should be. And the plant has decided to go to seed again for possibly the third time in a lot of cases. And that means that there is potentially a requirement to tidy up some of those paddocks again before we go into the building phase. Now, that said, on the ground that's dry, there's very little waste. Utilization levels are very high. So to be fair, that seed head can be, in some cases, especially on ground that was already mechanically altered, we'll call it. That seed head is very much a visual thing, really, or an optical illusion, we'll call it. In that it's not actually the quality of the grass through where those seed heads are popping up is actually not that bad. It's not your severe high level of dung pad kind of area that's very unpalatable, etc., etc. So just be conscious of that, I suppose. And as I said, there's a 3 to 4 week window at the very most, probably, unless growth is fantastically strong now through the month of August, to correct those paddocks. So baling obviously being the first choice if we get the option, but maybe it may not be an option on some farms given grass situation. Obviously then pre-mowing maybe, again, not the preference, but obviously a tool in the toolbox, as I've said before, and then topping also as well may be a requirement in order to not hit the cows too hard, but also get your pre-graze or your post-grazing height down to where it needs to be if a paddock is particularly poor. So again, just to, as I said, on the 2.5 livestock units scenario, it's not too bad to get there. What will dictate that, I suppose, is silage ground coming back in may drop you down to 2.5. So obviously that changes your dynamic in terms of where you're stocked at. You're pitching your autumn building cover at. If you don't have silage ground on the platform and you're already running at 3, then obviously that's your target to hit. I suppose in some cases you could argue, but I think there's going to be a very difficult case to be made this year unless cows in very bad order or not going well at all. The cows, given the price of milk, are going to stay on the platform for quite a period, I would think. And that may have implications. That's another thing that people need to be conscious of. If in the past you've sold culls or early in order to build your cover, but this year you're kind of thinking that you're going to milk them on, then you need to factor that into your decision. Now, while we'd probably recommend the people who can go changing things for those reasons, it is going to be a factor on farms that people are going to be tempted to carry those cows for a little bit longer, I would think, and try to generate more revenue from them, obviously. The other thing is if you have other stock on the platform, such as heifers or calves that might be moving out to silage blocks in due course, that will also alter your stocking rate, and that can change. The timing of that, it can vary, obviously. And again, just because second cuts are, I've noticed around here anyway, are a little bit later because they got off to a slow start. They're a week or 10 days possibly behind in a lot of cases, I would think. That's going to impact in terms of recovery of grass on outblocks to allow for young stock to move off to them. So people need to be conscious of that as well, in terms of that's going to keep your stocking rate higher on your milking platform for a period, and you need to be factoring that in terms of trying to make sure that you have that cover there to keep your cows right. But then when those young stock move off, what impact does that have on the overall cover as well, in terms of there's a balancing act involved in it. And as you can see then, I suppose the key dates there, I suppose, are that by mid-August that we have we're starting to build 200 for the 2.5, 250 for our 3 livestock units, and then 220 for our higher stocking rate of 3.5 plus. And then, as I said, it's very difficult to build that cover on farms unless we're going to actually bring in extra supplement. In a lot of cases with the higher stocking rates, we actually are looking at an awful thought to be considering, but feeding some bit of silage in order to slow down rotation and increase the level of grass that's in front of cows in order to get that bank there. And if that doesn't happen in August, we won't make the target in September, which is the problem. And as I said, it's actually if I showed you the pasture-based graph now, which I just don't have to hand there, you would see that we have a situation where we're outgrowing our demand generally through the month of August. And once we hit September, we're beginning to fade off quite quickly. And obviously we can't build at that stage. Now, the temptation is obviously not to put in the silage at this stage, because obviously it's an inconvenience, and people, as I said, are just want to kick back at this stage now, having put in a lot of effort into the season so far. But if you are serious about trying to get your grass cover up, it is something that you're going to have to consider doing. And it may actually only be very short-lived in order to just get that bit of an extra kick in terms of taking advantage of the potential excessive growth over demand. And that's all you're trying to do, is just to build that cover up and make sure that you have enough grass on the farm. Because what we do once we hit September, we're freewheeling on the grass that we've built pretty much through to the end of the grazing season. Okay, so we don't want to have covers rising too high either. So there is a bit of a balancing act involved in this, and it's trying to keep that balance right is important. And trying to, as I said, I suppose the two key things that I want people to take from today, and we'll leave it at that in a minute, is that we need to try to build from a clean base. So we need to get a good residual post-grazing. If we're not getting a good residual post-grazing, we need to look at the farm and see, have we just too much grass on the farm at the moment, which is going to be slightly ironic in the context of what I'm talking about. And do we need to mow out something in order to keep the pre-grazing cover right, to get our post-grazing right? And that once we can build from a clean base, building from a clean base will be critically important to how we're going to manage our grazing in this mid-September through to the 1st of October type scenario. Because what we're talking about, if we take it in the middle ground here at the 3 cows to the hectare, if at mid-September, very, very broadly speaking, or very crudely speaking, if our average farm cover is 1,100, that means we are going into covers potentially of up to 2,200 potentially. Ideally, we wouldn't probably be as high as that. We want to maybe max kind of 2,021. But they are not easy covers to graze out, and they will be exceptionally difficult covers to graze out if there's a butt of a residual left at the bottom of them. So they're going to be tricky to graze out if we're not working off a clean base. So 2 things to take from this morning would be that we need to start considering about building cover. And if we are serious about building cover, we need to start thinking about doing something about it in August in order to put the grass there for September. And the second thing is that we want to be trying to build that cover off of a clean base. So we need to bale, mow, or bale pre-mow, depending on the circumstances, or top residuals if they're not satisfactory, in order to build that cover from a clean base. So that's it for today. As I said, it has to be a quick one because I need to get to somewhere for 11 o'clock. So I hope people got something from that. And as I said, it's just a timely reminder, really, more than anything else, that just to kick the mind into gear that, okay, it's hard to believe it, that is the 21st of July, but that we're actually talking about what we need to do in order to have grass there for the back end of the autumn. But that's the nature of the beast, unfortunately, and that's the case. So I wish you all well for the week ahead. Just to say that next week I'm going to do a little bit on farm safety. This week was actually farm safety week, but unfortunately John McNamara, who's coming on to talk to me next week, wasn't available because he's involved in something else this morning. So he's going to come on next week talking about a very interesting topic, I suppose, in terms of respiratory health, which some people may think, like, what's that about, basically? But I think in the context of COVID, everybody should have a conscious idea of the importance of respiratory health. And I suppose in the context of farming, we are inclined to work in possibly dusty environments. We'll be moving into an environment during the winter period where we'll be putting out sawdust and lime on cubicles. There's a risk to eyes, obviously, with lime. And there's obviously a risk to your lungs as well in terms of inhaling anything like that. So respiratory health will be the topic next week in terms of farm safety. And I hope people will join in for that, because it's important to be aware and to be very conscious of, especially where people are involved on the farm with you, that you need to look out for their respiratory health and their health and safety as well as your own. And that's very, very important. So everybody has somebody helping out on a farm, and it's probably an important factor that we are probably inclined to not think of enough is there health and safety paramount in terms of the way we're asking them to operate, etc. So hopefully you can join me next week, as I said, talking about respiratory health, safe farming for the rest of the week, and we'll talk to you next week. Okay, thank you for tuning in. Bye.
That's all for this week's Let's Talk Dairy webinar series, and don't forget to look out for more bonus episodes each week. I'll be back with our usual Dairy Edge interview on Monday, so do listen in then. I'm Emma Louise Coffey, and thanks for listening.